It started with nothing more than a job interview, a plain, ordinary Tuesday that would quietly shift the course of his life. The moment he stepped in her office, the air itself seemed to still. Behind a sleek oak desk sat Elena Morales, 40 years old, the kind of woman who carried presence rather than demanded it. Her dark hair, smooth and cascading past her shoulders, framed a face that wore both warmth and authority. A faint trace of rose perfume lingered in the air, subtle, professional, but unforgettable. She looked up from her papers, her gaze sharp yet kind. "You're early," she said, her lips curving slightly, as if amused by his nervous energy. He smiled, steadying his breath. "I figured being early was better than being forgettable." That earned a soft laugh, the kind that melted tension without effort. As the interview unfolded, their conversation slipped beyond the standard questions. He spoke of his ambitions, his passion for design, his hunger to learn. She listened, really listened, in a way few people ever did. There was something magnetic in her calm confidence. Every time their eyes met, he felt an undercurrent, quiet but undeniable, a pull that had nothing to do with professionalism. When the meeting ended, she stood to shake his hand. Her fingers were cool against his, her grip firm. But what stayed with him was the look she gave him, assessing, curious, almost reluctant to let go. "We'll be in touch," she said, but her tone carried a softness that hinted she already knew she would be. As he stepped out of her office, his heart beat faster than it should have for a simple interview. It wasn't attraction in the shallow sense. It was intrigue. She was older, composed, a woman who had seen more of life than he had, and that only made her more fascinating. The next morning, an email arrived. Asterisk, welcome to the team. Asterisk, his first day, was a blur of introductions, but every time he passed her glass office, his eyes wandered, not out of infatuation, but something subtler. Curiosity, respect, admiration wrapped in silence. And when she called him in later to discuss his first assignment, the world seemed to narrow to the sound of her voice. "Don't be afraid to take risks," she said, leaning slightly forward, her tone firm but encouraging. "You're here because I saw something in you. Prove me right." He nodded, but her words echoed deeper than she likely intended. Something about the way she looked at him, equal parts challenge and care, felt personal. As the evening light fell across her office, painting golden lines along her hair, he caught himself wondering what her life looked like beyond these walls. And that was when he realized the job he came for was not the only thing he'd just signed up for. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was the beginning of something neither of them saw coming. The first few weeks passed in a rhythm, professional, predictable, and yet charged with something unspoken. Every morning, he'd catch a glimpse of her before the team meeting began. Elena Morales, 40, the department head everyone admired and quietly feared. She carried herself with an elegance that didn't ask for attention. It just arrived with her. A crisp white blouse, soft curls brushing her shoulders, the faint scent of vanilla and coffee. She was both warmth and discipline in one frame. He learned quickly that she kept her world tidy. Her schedule, her desk, her emotions. She didn't mix work and personal life, and she expected the same from everyone else. "Boundaries are what keep the machine running," she once said in that low, calm voice that somehow made even reprimands sound like music. He told himself he understood. He told himself he respected that. But every time she leaned over his desk to review his work, every time her sleeve brushed his hand or her voice softened in approval, that distance she guarded so carefully felt smaller. One evening, he stayed late, his monitor the only glow left in the quiet office. He was finishing a proposal when her door opened. She looked surprised to find him still there. "You're still working?" she asked, setting down a file. Her tone was casual, but her eyes lingered. He shrugged. "You said approve you right." That earned a rare smile. "You really take things to heart, don't you?" Silence filled the space between them, the kind that wasn't awkward, just heavy with awareness. The office lights reflected in her dark eyes as she moved closer, reviewing his work on the screen. He could feel her presence before she even spoke again. "This is good," she murmured, her voice softer now, You've got instincts most people twice your age don't. He turned slightly, close enough to catch the faint glint of a silver bracelet around her wrist. Close enough to see the way her lips parted, like she was about to say something else, but didn't. Instead, she stepped back and straightened her jacket. "Go home," she said gently. "You don't need to impress me." But the way her gaze lingered said otherwise. That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of her standing there, confident but momentarily unsure, played in his mind. It wasn't a fantasy. It was something quieter, deeper. He admired her strength, her restraint. And beneath that admiration grew a dangerous thought. Maybe boundaries weren't meant to be walls. Maybe they were just lines people drew to see who would dare cross them. The next morning, their interactions returned to normal. Emails, deadlines, polite nods. But every time their hands brushed while exchanging documents, it felt like the entire room paused. He was learning the rules she lived by, and slowly, without meaning to, he was preparing to break them. Days turned into weeks, and what began as subtle glances evolved into a quiet, undeniable tension that neither of them could ignore. He told himself it was admiration, respect for the way she carried herself through boardrooms full of men who underestimated her. But the truth was heavier than that. It was the way her voice lingered in his head after meetings, the way she absent-mindedly tucked her hair behind her ear when reading reports, the warmth in her eyes that surfaced when she forgot to guard herself. Elena Morales wasn't just his boss. She was gravity disguised as grace. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the city, drumming softly against the wide glass windows of her office. Most of the staff had gone home early, but he stayed behind to finish a project. When the thunder rumbled, she stepped out of her office, arms folded, watching the rain blur the skyline. "You're still here?" she asked with that faint smile. He leaned back in his chair. "I could ask you the same." Her laughter was soft, genuine, the kind that only escaped when her guard slipped. "Touché," she said. "Old habits die hard." They stood there for a moment, the storm outside becoming a strange sort of soundtrack. She looked tired, not in a way that showed weakness, but in the way someone looks when they've carried the world too long without letting anyone help. Without thinking, he said, "You don't always have to be strong, you know." Her eyes lifted, dark brown, steady, but for the first time, vulnerable. "And if I'm not?" she asked quietly. "Who will be?" He didn't have an answer. He just held her gaze, letting silence say what words couldn't. When the lights flickered, she let out a small sigh, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I should go," she murmured, but she didn't move. Instead, she walked to the window again, watching the rain trail down the glass. "You remind me of someone," she said softly. "Someone good." Her lips curved into a faint, nostalgic smile. "Someone brave enough to believe in things I stopped believing in." The moment stretched thin, fragile, electric. He could feel it, the pull between them, the space begging to be crossed. Her perfume mixed with the scent of rain, filling the air with something quietly intoxicating. But just when the silence began to tilt towards something dangerous, she turned. "We should both get some rest," she said, her tone steady again, the walls quickly rebuilt. He nodded, even as something inside him rebelled against the distance she reinstated. "Good night, Ms. Morales." "Good night," she replied, almost a whisper. As he gathered his things, he glanced back once more and saw her still by the window, her hand pressed lightly against the glass, eyes lost somewhere far away. The storm had passed, but the air between them hadn't cleared. If anything, it had only grown heavier, and somewhere deep down, both of them knew it wasn't just the rain that was about to break. The morning after the storm, the office felt quieter than usual, as if the rain had washed away not just the night, but the careful boundaries they had both tried to maintain. He walked in early, coffee in hand, and found her already there, standing by the window again. Sunlight poured through the glass, turning her black hair into a dark cascade of silk. The lights softened her, made her look less like the sharp, commanding boss everyone saw, and more like the woman he had glimpsed last night. When she turned, their eyes met. It was a simple thing, a glance, a moment, but it carried everything they weren't saying. "Morning," he said, setting the coffee on her desk before she could protest. "You didn't have to," she murmured, though her fingers brushed the cup like it was something delicate. "But thank you." He smiled faintly. "Guess I just wanted to return the favor for all the late nights you stayed back helping me." Her lips curved, almost amused. "That's all doing my job. Then consider this doing mine, keeping you human." That made her laugh. A real laugh this time, unguarded and soft. It echoed around the office, and for a fleeting second, the air felt too easy, too close. She tried to turn away, to regain her balance, but something shifted in her expression. The amusement faded, replaced by something quieter, heavier. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, eyes still on her desk, "why people talk about lines like they're walls? Maybe lines aren't meant to divide. Maybe they're just reminders not a step too far." He leaned against the edge of her desk, close enough to hear the change in her breathing. "And if both people want to step over?" Her gaze flicked to his, sharp and searching. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then she whispered, "Then they both fall." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed with everything they weren't brave enough to name. The air between them felt alive, as if it had its own rhythm. He took a step back, forcing a breath. "Maybe falling isn't always a bad thing," he said, his voice low but steady. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, she didn't look away. "You're too young to believe that. Or maybe you've just forgotten what it feels like." The words landed between them, tender and sharp all at once. She exhaled slowly, setting the coffee down as if it had suddenly become too warm to hold. "You should get back to work," she said quietly, though her tone lacked conviction. He nodded, but neither of them moved. The only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the city outside. When he finally turned to leave, she called after him, "Thank you for the coffee." He smiled over his shoulder. "Anitime. Her name, spoken so naturally, so gently, hung in the air like a secret. And for the first time, she didn't correct him. The line between them hadn't been crossed yet, but it had definitely blurred. It started innocently, or at least that's what they told themselves. A last-minute project. A late-night meeting. Just two professionals staying behind to meet a deadline. The office had emptied out hours ago. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, and the city lights outside painted the walls in gold and silver streaks. Elena sat at her desk, her hair loosely tied back, reading through a report. The glow of the screen lit her face, softening the angles, revealing the faintest trace of fatigue beneath her poise. He watched from across the room, typing, pretending to focus, but his eyes kept drifting toward her. There was something magnetic about the way she carried exhaustion, graceful, uncomplaining, quietly strong. "Don't you ever rest?" he finally asked, breaking the quiet. Her eyes lifted, a slow smile forming. "Rest doesn't finish reports." He chuckled. Most people would have gone home hours ago. I'm not most people." "I know." The way he said it, steady, certain, made her pause. Their eyes met across the soft glow of the office. The moment stretched, filling with the sound of rain beginning to tap gently against the windows. "Come here," she said after a long silence, her tone practical, but her gaze warmer than before. "Let me show you something." He moved beside her, leaning close as she pointed to a section on his laptop. The distance between them vanished. His shoulder nearly brushed hers, her perfume faint but unmistakable, something floral and expensive that lingered in the air like a memory. Her voice was calm, patient, explaining the details, but every word seemed to slow, soften. The space around them felt smaller, the rain louder. He could see the reflection of her face in the screen, the curve of her lips, the delicate line of her jaw, the light catching the silver hoops in her ears. When she turned slightly, their eyes met in the reflection. Neither moved. "See," she said quietly, her tone barely above a whisper. He nodded, though he wasn't sure what she'd just shown him. They both realized it at the same time. How close they were, how still the room had become. She exhaled, slow and careful, and turned her gaze back to the screen. "We should finish this," she said, her voice softer now, uncertain. "Right." But neither of them reached for the keyboard. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, she stood, walking toward the window. It's raining too hard to leave, she said, looking out. You might as well wait it out. He joined her, standing close but not touching. The city below shimmered with wet light. It's beautiful, he murmured. Yes, she said quietly. It is. He glanced at her reflection in the glass, her eyes distant, her lips pressed together as if holding back something that wanted to escape. I keep forgetting, she said after a long pause. You're just starting your life, and you think yours is already over? Her gaze met his in the reflection. No, she said, but some things aren't meant to start again. He turned slightly toward her. What they're meant to? She smiled, faintly, heartbreakingly. Then you'll have to remind me how. The rain kept falling, and in that quiet office so did one more piece of her carefully built distance. Morning came too soon. The rain from the night before had left streaks on the office windows, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and regret. Elena arrived earlier than usual, not because she had work to do, but because she needed space to think before seeing him again. She stood by her desk, staring at the chair he'd sat in last night. The memory played like a film she couldn't pause. The closeness, the silence, the look they'd shared in the reflection of the window. It had been nothing and everything. When he walked in, the room shifted. The same easy confidence he always carried was still there, but his eyes found hers almost immediately, and something inside her tightened. Morning, he said softly. She didn't look up from her laptop. You're early. So are you. Her fingers froze on the keyboard. She sighed, then finally looked at him. About last night, he cut in gently. You don't have to say it. I do, she replied, her voice steady but quieter. We crossed a line. He nodded slowly. Then why does it feel like we didn't? The question hung between them. Heavy, dangerous, true. She turned away, pretending to adjust a stack of folders, but her hands betrayed her, trembling slightly. I'm your boss, she said, her tone measured, professional again. You're young, ambitious, and this, whatever this is, will only complicate everything. He took a step closer. You think I care about titles or age? You think I don't know what I want? Her eyes flashed, not in anger, but in self-defense. You don't, she whispered. Not yet. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. You keep telling me that like you're trying to convince yourself. The tension was unbearable, not loud or dramatic, but quiet and real, the kind that burned slowly beneath words. She wanted to be the composed woman everyone saw, the leader, the mentor, the untouchable. But he'd seen her humanity, and she hated how much that made her want to be seen again. Stop looking at me like that, she said, her voice cracking ever so slightly. Like what? Like I'm someone you could love. He swallowed hard. Maybe you are. Her breath caught. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The sound of her heartbeat filled her ears. Then she drew in a slow, deliberate breath, regaining control. This conversation ends here, she said quietly, stepping back. We both have work to do. He didn't argue, just nodded, eyes lingering on her a second longer than they should have, before turning toward his desk. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, filled with all the words they didn't say. All morning, she tried to bury herself in tasks, but his presence was everywhere. The sound of his typing, the warmth of his voice when he answered calls, the faint echo of last night's closeness. When noon came, she slipped out to the balcony for air. The city stretched endlessly below her, and she felt both powerful and painfully small. She whispered to herself, this has to stop. But deep down, she knew what had started couldn't be easily undone. The line she drew last night wasn't a boundary anymore. It was a dare neither of them could resist crossing again. The week that followed was a quiet war of restraint. Every glance, every small exchange between them was threaded with something unspoken, desire wrapped in discipline, affection hidden beneath professionalism. Both pretended nothing had changed, yet everything had. Elena worked harder than ever, staying late, refusing to let her emotions leak in her leadership. But she couldn't deny the way her pulse quickened every time he entered the room. He, too, masked it well, polite, composed, and yet there was always that flicker of warmth in his eyes whenever she spoke. One Friday evening, long after everyone else had gone, their paths crossed again. He was by the copier, finishing reports. She was packing up her things, ready to leave. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, and the office felt too quiet for two people trying so hard to ignore the weight of their own hearts. "Working late again?" she asked, her tone light but weary. He smiled faintly. "Following your example." She leaned against the doorway, studying him. The rolled-up sleeves, the tired determination, the quiet sincerity that had disarmed her from the beginning. "You're good at what you do," she said softly. "You'll go far." He met her gaze. "Not going far means leaving this behind." She froze. "Don't," she whispered. "Not here." But he didn't move closer. He didn't have to. His words lingered between them like heat. "You keep acting like what we feel is something to be ashamed of." "It's not." Her breath trembled. "It's not shame. It's reality." He took a slow breath, searching her face. "Then tell me, Elena, in your version of reality, do we ever get to be happy?" That question broke something open in her. She walked to the window, staring out at the fading city lights. The glass reflected her face beside his. Two people caught between duty and desire, age and courage. "I've built everything on control," she said quietly. "My career, my life, all of it. And then you came along and made me forget how to breathe." He stepped closer, stopping just behind her. Not touching, not this time. "Maybe it's okay to breathe again." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "You don't understand what this would cost me." "I do," he replied softly. "And I'd never ask you to lose yourself for me. But I'd wait, if it meant one day you'd stop hiding from what's real." For the first time, she smiled, sad, knowing, full of tenderness. She turned to face him, her hand brushing his arm just enough to make her heart ache. "Maybe in another time," she said. "When the world's not watching, when I'm not your boss, and when age doesn't matter." He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then I'll see you in another time." They stood there, silent, the city lights reflecting in their eyes. There was no kiss, no confession, just mutual understanding and the soft ache of what couldn't be. As she walked away, her perfume lingered in the air, the only trace of a love that had to stay unspoken. He watched her go, whispering to himself, "Age matters, only if we let it." That night, he finally understood, some love stories aren't meant to be loud. Some are written in restraint, in longing, in the quiet promise that even endings can be beautiful.